Hey guys, Fox here, and today we're going to be doing the last power rankings of the 2022 USFL season. Championship has happened, the playoffs are over, and as I said, I was going to do one last power rankings for this season, and it is going to be the post-playoff power rankings. Now, naturally, the bottom four really aren't going to have any change because really nothing has happened, hasn't been any major news, but the top four is definitely going to have a couple of changes. So without further ado, why not get this started? Unsurprisingly, at number 8 is the Maulers again. This one is just, you hate to say it, but it's not a surprise to anyone. This team is just pretty much was awful the whole year. I mean, now that we have a completed, stat line of teams that, and their, points scored and point differential, and as you can see, by the way, asterisks are for each playoff game they played. They finished dead last in the point differential by an absurd margin, by 63. They had the least amount of points scored, yet they only were outscored by 15 by Tampa, yet Tampa, had a 63 better point differential. It just shows how bad Pittsburgh was. The quarterback situation was horrid the whole year. The coaching was horrid the whole year. This team was the worst team in the 2022 USFL season by a mile. Coming in at number 7 are the Michigan Panthers. Panthers naturally finish above the Maulers, mainly due to the fact that, yes, in the points scored and point differential, they did pretty much pwn the Maulers in both of them. It's not that hard to pwn them, but they did. They ended up scoring over 200 points. In fact, they were the only team to miss the playoffs that scored over 200 points. And their point differential was a lot better than Pittsburgh. And not to mention, they did win the Tank Bowl at the end of the year. So they definitely are better than the Pittsburgh Maulers. It's not saying that much, but, I mean, hey, you're not the worst team, yet you're getting the first overall pick in next year's draft. That sounds pretty good. Coming in at number 6 is going to be the Tampa Bay Bandits. The Bandits ended up finishing 6 despite the fact they did have a better record than the Gamblers. The reason they finished 6, as I talked about before, and I'll talk about it again now, the point scored point differential, they were 7th in both of them. They were a solid 35 points behind Houston on points scored, and they were a solid 21 points below Houston in point differential. The Bandits, whenever they lost, they usually lost big and they only won small. The Gamblers were able to keep a lot of games close during the year, mainly due to them, blowing halftime leads. But the fact is, their defense was much better than Tampa. Their offense was pretty much the same, if not just more efficient. So I don't think it's a shock that Tampa is below them despite having more wins. Yeah, they could have made the playoffs if they beat the Breakers. But overall, the Gamblers just were a much more solid team for the most part. And especially considering the fact that they ended the season on a much better note, on a 2-game winning streak, whereas the Bandits were on a 2-game losing streak to end the year. Number 5, as I said, is the Gamblers. The Gamblers did beat out the Bandits despite having one more loss. And as I said, the point scored point differential is a big reason why. When you're just that much ahead of them on both of them, it does show that your team was definitely a much more solid team. And overall, in terms of players, it's just they had Chris Odom. There was not a single player on Tampa's roster that was remotely as good as him. He won Defensive Player of the Year since that last Power Ranking video, I believe. Yeah. And it shows that he was the only non-New Jersey General to win one of the actual awards for, players. I know, Matt Colburn won, Sportsman of the Year, something like that. But for actually, on-field awards, I mean, he was the only non-general to win it, and he was clear-cut the best defensive player in the league. Tampa had no one like that, and I think that kind of hurt him a lot. So, Houston deservedly gets 5th, or I guess the title of best of non-playoff teams, whatever that's worth. Coming in at number 4 is going to be, once again, the New Orleans Breakers. The Breakers end up not moving, just because I had them as the worst playoff team heading in. I didn't fully believe I didn't even think they were going to win their playoff game. They didn't. They pretty much just played pretty terribly, and it was the biggest blowout of all the 3 playoff games. So I don't think it's a shock that they, aren't high. And then the point scored and point differential world, they were the bottom. Naturally, they are having, those playoff points scored. But to put it simply, with an extra game, they still only beat out Michigan by 2 points in points scored. That's with an extra game. And point differential-wise, plus 18 was the worst of all 4 playoff teams. And it was the worst of all 4 playoff teams in total points scored. It's just, they were a very ineffective offense during some games when they played ugly. Slaughter had some bad games, and overall, it's what ended up costing them in the playoffs. They are the worst team to make the playoffs. And if a couple of games had changed, I might have put them under the Gamblers. But they made the playoffs. Congrats, making it. But overall, they were the worst team heading into the playoffs by a wide margin for me, and they proved it. Coming in at number 3 is going to be the New Jersey Generals. The Generals moved down 2 spots, mainly because of just how they played that playoff game. I lost a lot of faith heading into the next season in Mike Riley. He coached one of the worst coached games in football that I've seen recently. The fact that he went with his 2-quarterback system almost the whole year. And when he wasn't, it worked best when DeAndre was the full-time quarterback. But rather than do either DeAndre being the full-time quarterback or doing the 2-quarterback system, he only used Perez to throw. Ultimately, that single decision pretty much cost them the game. Their offense was super stale for the most part because their whole gimmick was that, yes, we can run the ball really tough, but when we have 2 different quarterbacks that can throw and both run, it's a big deal. But DeAndre being a better runner was a very good thing for their offense. And when you don't use that, you end up proving that your team might not be that good because, yes, they finished the season 9-1, but they ended up losing the game that mattered the most to them. The fact is, they only put up 7 offensive points because it wasn't for a Kevontae Turpin return touchdown. They would only put up 7 points in a playoff game. That's pathetic. I mean, I don't think it should shock anyone that they dropped this low. The bottom line is, I thought the Stars were going to beat them. I thought they might play sloppy, but I thought it was going to at least be a shootout where it was sloppy defense. But no, the Generals just didn't come to play. They barely lost to the Stars, I guess. But at the end of the day, when you make that bad of a coaching decision and you single-handedly blow your team that game, and if it wasn't for a couple return touchdowns, by even one by each team, the game would have been really bad offensively in terms of point-wise. But, end of the day, they lost. They deserved to be moved down 2 spots because the Stars were the better team and proved it in the championship. Speaking of the championship game, number 2 is the Philadelphia Stars again. The Stars stay at 2. I had them as the second best team heading into the playoffs. I had them above Birmingham, which I feel like some people might have been shocked at, but I felt they were playing exceptionally well. In the point differential, total points scored realm, they've consistently been the high-scoring team for the past few weeks. And they ended up being the only team to crack 300. Granted, they had to have 2 extra games, but they still did crack 300. And point differential-wise, could have been better, but that was mainly due to their terrible start at the beginning of the year. And to put it simply, I genuinely thought of putting them at 1, and my reasoning is the fact that when both teams were at, that full strength, it was a very close game, and eventually the Stars lost because Cookus got hurt. And the fact is, they played the championship game without Matt Colburn. So, I was debating on putting the Stars as the number 1 team. But overall, they did lose that game. And, I mean, it really sucks. Bart Andrews did an outstanding job during the whole year managing the fact that they lost their starting quarterback, who genuinely probably would have won MVP. Brian Scott probably would have won MVP. He was the only quarterback that had shown early on that he could be that, pass, getting yards guy. But it's just, they lost and it hurt. Cookus, it sucks that he got that injury, the last game of the season. It's just, the Stars, this season, they have a lot to be proud for, those guys. It's just injuries took them out at the worst possible time. Having to go to your 3rd-string quarterback in a title game, especially at the end when you're, in need of scoring, that hurts. The team was solid. It's just they couldn't get it done, and it was mainly due to injuries. They're the second-best team in the league. They were solid. But you know what? Just like the original USFL in the first season, finished second best. Coming in at number 1 is the Stallions. Yeah, they're back. They were number 1 for probably about 70% of the season, and they're back at 1 to end the year. They won the title. They got benefited from that home stadium for the first 10 games. They went 9-1. They proved they were a force. And then that playoff game when I thought they were going to continue playing this awful, sluggy, terrible football, they just balled out. I mean, yes, they got 14 points off, non-offensive touchdowns and stuff, but they still were able to put up like 30 points on the Breakers. They pwned them. It was the only blowout in the entire playoffs. So they were able to blow them out and just cruise past them. And they go to the championship game and they beat them. They beat the Stars. Now, yes, the Stars dealt with far more injuries, and no offense, but Case Cookus being hurt and being downgraded to KJ Castillo is a much bigger downgrade than Jamar Smith to Alex Magoo. But the fact is, Jamar got hurt much earlier on. He was out for the entire second half, and Alex Magoo had to play, and he was still able to pull it off and get him the W. So they won the title. Congrats to them. Victor Bolden got MVP. I mentioned before I don't think he should have won it, but congrats to him anyway. But overall, it's just, you go back to point score and point differential. Point score, they almost hit 300. But point differential, yeah, plus 82, that's pretty good in a 10-game season. You're averaging, 12 games for them. But, that's still averaging a pretty respectable margin. That's literally averaging, over 6 points a game that you're winning by, which isn't a ton, but it's more or less the idea that you kept on beating teams and you kept winning and winning and winning. They ended up only having one loss on the year. They finished with a total record of 12-1. Or 11-1, my bad. That's really solid. They were a legit power force, and they got the job done in the end. They proved that they didn't need that Birmingham home field advantage. Now, next year, with some of the teams supposedly being able to, expand, they won't have that, constant home field advantage. We don't know who's going to stay, who's going to go. But overall, for them, they succeeded in the year. They won the championship. And even though it's by a slim margin, both in-game and in the rankings, they are number one to end the 2022 USFL season. So that's it for the 2022 USFL season power rankings. The next power rankings will probably be, it'll probably be either right before the draft or it'll be when a lot of players are out of the league. I don't know for sure how I'm going to do that, but this is the end for the 2022 USFL season. Overall, it was a pretty insane year, but the top of the power rankings and the bottom pretty much never changed. It was always Birmingham and always Pittsburgh. Both the yin and the yang. One team awesome, one team horrid almost the whole year. There was maybe 3 weeks. Once the season started, there were maybe 3 weeks where one of those teams wasn't there. I know 1 week the Gamblers were at the bottom. I know the Generals and the Bandits were at the top at different points. It's just pretty whack, but got through it. I do have I have to do a recap of the betting picks for the year. I have a couple videos I got to do about the championship game, and then we're gonna get and start some actual overall content on the year. A lot more stuff that's more actually opinionated and stuff like that, rather than just power rankings stuff. Overall, if you enjoyed this journey and stuff like that, and you're ready for more content to come that's, bring back some more old USFL stuff, or you're just ready for next year already, subscribe and hit the bell. Make sure to hit it so you'll be notified as soon as I upload new videos. And as always, have a great night.